I love dandadan, and I believe it is the perfect depiction of shonen romance, specifically shonen romance, because romance on its own is huge. So many different ideas and genres and things that are constantly evolving. Shonen romance is a little bit different. It's specific, it's peculiar, and it's restricted. Perhaps things you should and shouldn't do. For me, there's two versions of shonen romance, very black and white. On one side, romance is the main focus with everything surrounding it. The other side, it is a secondary focus with the main appeal being something else. Dandadan for me falls into this second category, with romance being its secondary appeal, not its main draw. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't do romance well. That doesn't mean it doesn't give it the attention that it deserves. It just means that it's putting its eggs in multiple different baskets and not just one. And I can confidently say that it does it extremely well. Shonen romance is funny because its foundation and the expectation is drastically different to what would naturally be a normal romance, and that is because shonen is a specific demographic. So there's going to be a little bit more rules and restrictions and ideas that should and shouldn't be played upon on a consistent weekly manner. Now this isn't always the case, it's not a general rule, but you'll notice it quite often. And depending on the author, the romance could just be a sprinkle, a drizzle of two characters faintly looking at each other. Or it could be something a lot more full on, with weight, with an idea behind it, with momentum. This is important to figure out very early within your story, and I mean the first 10 chapters, because people, readers, watchers are expecting things. You need to set an expectation on what this story will provide you. So you're gonna have action, you're gonna have probably lovable characters, you're gonna have this and that. Do you show romance? How do you show romance early on? Do you tease it? Do you foreshadow it? Do you sprinkle it in early? Do you have the idea just thrown out there into the wind? However way you go about it, as long as it's there, it is to be expected. And because it is to be expected, then you have to play upon it. Do not fool your readers. Do not fool the watchers. If someone's sitting down and they see that you're playing heavily on romantic feelings very early within the story, then they want to see that evolve. And if it doesn't, people are going to get annoyed. So this is the power, the importance of expectation. This isn't just for romance, it's quite literally for your narrative, what you should expect from a story. In turn, this is also your foundation, the beginning, the groundwork. This is where you have the opportunity to write the roots of your story and these characters and how that will grow and evolve and entangle with each other over time. That sounds super simple, right? Super basic, but you'd be very surprised how easy it is to forget this foundational layer. The ideas in your head have to be converted into that foundation, but you can't give everything away. You can't do everything away. So you gotta peel it back. So you gotta hide like 99% of the character, 99% of the idea, and plant it into the ground. Dandadan does this extremely well because it plants a bunch of different ideas back to back to back, and it sets a really nice line of expectation. Firstly, battle manga. It's crazy, it's chaotic, it's wild. Aliens and spirits, curses, etc., etc. It's crazy. Next is comedy. This is a funny story. A lot of humorous moments, a lot of goofy characters and interactions. And lastly is romance. And the way that Dandadan does this is by chemistry. So the two main characters is Momo and Ken. And Momo and Ken are very prominent individuals. They have beautiful, powerful spotlights on top of them, which might sound obvious because they're the main characters, but I cannot reiterate how much attention they actually pull. Honestly, it's for a really simple reason. They just have a lot of quirk. They have a lot of charm. I guess a way to describe it is that foundationally, their characters feel real. They feel relatable. They feel alive. That too might sound obvious, but I guess they don't feel formulaic. They don't feel like they've been constructed or molded or, pieced together in some chimera Frankenstein type of way to create the perfect character for reader retention. They just feel like a normal person, a normal teenage girl and a normal teenage boy. And normal comes with quirks, comes with difficulties, it comes with problems. These aren't perfect characters. If anything, they're very problematic. How they speak to each other, how they interact is confusing. conflicted. They clash heads a lot. They're in vulnerable positions. They're so back and forth, up and down. The real range of their character and the humor that surrounds them almost seems overblown half the time. Like, no way these people could be this goofy or corny. But I think that's what sparks the imagination for their characters, and what is beautiful about their foundation is that it's there right from the beginning. It doesn't grow out of control. It kind of already is. It starts off that way. The difference is that when they meet, when they come together, they grow in different departments. That romance blooms for both of them, and in very powerful and different ways. If you didn't notice before, I mentioned chemistry and conflict. These are two of the most powerful things that you can have in pretty much any story, but for romance, it's like a given. You need this. If you want your romance to thrive in any department, you need chemistry and you need conflict. Let's put it like this. If you have a romance that doesn't have conflict and straight chemistry, it's stale. It can get boring very quickly. It seems too perfect, too clear, too concrete. You wouldn't expect anything to go wrong. Now, if you have all conflict and no chemistry, it's like two brick walls trying to fall in love. No spark, no energy, no identity, just hollow beings clashing together. Chemistry and conflict is so important, and you need that to thrive. How you want to play upon that type of chemistry and conflict is different within every single story. Chemistry can be something that's physical, something that's emotional, something that's mentally connecting. Conflict can be something that's outer, how the world is moving around you. It could be other people's reaction to you. It could be an inner conflict with yourself. Maybe your character has trauma or emotional problems that they can't deal with easily. Maybe they conflict with the love interest itself, either playfully or problematically. There is an endless amount of ways that you can go. And what you decide to focus on is going to shape and mold those characters. You kind of have to write them together. You can't separate them and write them independently and then bring them back together, because it's going to feel isolated. The further that you have those characters apart, writing them independently, the less chemistry they're going to have. So you have to keep them relatively close. But then you can't have them too close, almost joined at the hip, because maybe that won't provide enough conflict. Or perhaps a conflict can provide a rift, so they are spaced out a little bit more. See, the further that I talk about it, the further that you go into it, the more detailed and overwhelming and kind of confusing it becomes. It sounds very overwhelming, but I promise you, if you're ever writing a character or if you're ever writing a romantic story, it does come a lot more naturally. Even if you've never experienced romance to the degree that you are writing it, you just gotta think about it. Find the middle ground that works for the story that you want to tell, and with the characters that are going to tell it. Dandadan is a beautiful example of a balancing act mixed with the perfect picture of chemistry and conflict that you can imagine, because it has so many different versions of chemistry and also so many different versions of conflict, because they all mash together, not into this overwhelming pot of oh my god, but a simple train of thought. I like you and you like me. That's it. It's really funny that all of the craziness that dandadan can provide, both from its outer world, the fighting, the curses, the spirits, the aliens, the different points of chemistry that can be very overwhelming, like Gigi or Ira or Turbo Granny or Seiko, all of these different things that you have to focus on, the humor, the contrast, yada yada. You think it would create a messy experience, but when you get to that interaction, when you get to just these two characters, all of it kind of flows to the wayside. It's actually really impressive how the author is able to do this consistently. Within the heat of battle, within a very massive arc, as soon as these characters interact, it's almost like none of it ever mattered. It's almost like their world is right in front of them, and that everything else around it doesn't matter. The wonder of chemistry and conflict comes down to character. Momo and Ken are beautiful characters, and as much as they are very, very similar, they're also incredibly opposite to each other. Momo has a spark, a fire, a driving force within her that can be overwhelming, but she's very true to herself. She's true to her feelings. She's true to how she acts. She never really puts on her face. She wears all of her emotions on her sleeve. But it's a big contrast to the childhood that we actually see. It's almost like she's purposefully gone down this very loud route of being a Gyaru light, which is indicative to her bubbly personality or her clothing choice. It speaks volumes to her character characteristics. But as a child, she was a lot more secluded, bullied quite often because of the spirituality connected with her grandmother. So of course, that type of childhood would lead almost to a polar opposite. Quiet, timid child that was heavily bullied is now a gyaru. As loud and wonderful her personality is, when it comes to things that, she's crushing over, she starts to get anxious, she starts to get quirky, she starts to get weird. And it's a really funny characteristic that she has, that she can't hear the name Ken Takamura because she has a crush on a celebrity with the same name, but then Ken's actual name is the same as that celebrity. So they go hand in hand. Funniest thing about Ken is that he's kind of the complete opposite of the celebrity that she has a crush on. And I think that on its own is important to point out, is that she views Ken as human first and foremost, whereas the possessed or evolved, awakened form of Ken is probably closer to that celebrity crush. So naturally you would think, oh, Momo would like the awakened Ken more, with the monotone voice and the expressions, etc. But that's just not true. She likes Ken as a human. She crushes heavily on the little things that he does. And the same can be said for him as well. Just a boy that has this fascination with aliens. Momo pulls all the best parts out of him, gives him an opportunity to be himself, gives him an opportunity to make friends, gives him an opportunity to be somebody. And it's quite sad when you think about Ken's childhood because he never had friends, he never had people to talk to, we know nothing about his family. The first person that enters his life from our knowledge is Momo. And it's not smooth sailing straight from the beginning, it's not love at first sight, but she's the first person that connects to him on a human level, treats him like a normal person, even shares and expresses an interest in aliens. And at first it might be because of that guilt, but that's where it starts, that's where it grows, and that's when they start to join together. I cannot reiterate enough, payoff. If you have a romance, you need to have a payoff. If you don't have a payoff, you are going to wish you did, because your readers, your watchers are going to be very, very upset. I'm sure that you can think of many stories that do not have the payoff that you would like it to have. And I'm talking romantically, not other stories. See, you could make payoff be the most complex issue imaginable. Like my favorite character didn't get what their favorite character, yada yada. That's not what I'm talking about. That is personal preference. Payoff is actually committing to the foundation that you set right at the beginning of the story and the expectation that you set. But it's also taking into consideration the chemistry and conflict that you've built throughout the entirety of your narrative and showing that respect. You want to respect the characters. You want to respect your own writing, your own world, your own time that you've put into the story, but more importantly, you want to respect the reader. If you have set something in motion, if you have that expectation there, a reader is expecting it. Now, it doesn't have to be the way that they want it to be, but it at least has to be something. And the more that you build that expectation, the more you set that foundation, the more you play into chemistry and conflict, the more that payoff builds. So even if you do the most abstract payoff imaginable, it's still respectful to the reader's time. They're still getting a version of something that they knew was coming. Payoff is critical. It's important. You need it. What is Momo and Ken's payoff, you ask? They actually figure each other out. That's the payoff. And while this is an ongoing story, it continues to pay off. There's actually multiple iterations, I would say, personally, for their payoff throughout the story. Like checkpoints, so to speak. And it all leads up to one very critical moment, very huge moment where they finally realize what these two have noticed since the beginning of the story. That they love each other, that they have feelings for each other, that they work really well with each other, that they don't want to be apart from each other. That's the payoff. In some ways, dandadan is kind of a slow burn romantically, at least in shonen terms. It is definitely a slow burn, which is funny because it is the fastest experienced story you'll probably read. However, because you have those so-called payoff checkpoints, it's not as slow as you think. It's more like just getting through the checklist of things that kind of need to be done before they get to the big moment. And really, you can lengthen that out however much you want. You want it really short, you want it really long, depending on how long your story runs. I don't really know, but see, because we've already have it, from here, we can evolve that chemistry and conflict. And we can even set a new foundation and a new expectation. See, that's the brilliance of it, right? You don't just have to have the same thing all the way to the end of the story. If the payoff is in the middle of the story, you can start again. You can do something different. And you'll notice that often Maybe. Slow burn manga, I personally do not like, because the one big payoff you get is usually the end of the story, when the characters finally admit their love and they get together. That's the end. Sometimes it's followed by a time skip, their family, their future life, end of story. These are fine, because the reading experience is a slow burn thing. You get to watch how they fall in love, right? However, I find romance that gets to the point a little bit more interesting, because there's so many more things and ideas you can actually do. That's just for romance. Shonen romance is a little bit different because you have other things to focus on. You have a lot of fights, a lot of characters, a lot of action, etc., etc. Romance isn't the main concern. But there is an alternative to this. What if every aspect of your arc, every aspect of your character, every aspect of your narrative writing had to do with romance? Specifically, had to do with love. You want to know the biggest payoff of Momo and Ken? They are the core of what this story actually truly represents. Dandadan's story is about love. It is the point of this story, and it is the payoff of the story. Every arc, every character, every idea is laced with love. And I don't mean that metaphorically, I mean that literally. When you take into consideration the representation of aliens and curses, love is the universal language that brings everybody together. If aliens can love, if curses and spirits can love, if humans can love, then it brings them all together, puts them on the exact same pedestal, and you will see that time and time again throughout this story. So yeah, it's a battle manga and it has slices of romance within it, but the point of this battle manga is that love transcends everything. Love can be a cosmic feeling, not just bound to humans. And in my opinion, that is the perfect depiction of a shonen romance.